pump. Another very ugly, messy thing, but it's a diesel lister pump down there with the pumps water for these guys.
Mm.
But it's one of those situations with a park where they're a little bit sort of holier than thou, because they prevent everyone else from making a mess, and as the custodians they're quite good at that, but they very often are the worst culprits when it comes to making their own messes and so on.
Okay, well I've got that on camera. So
No, that's just true. It's the same. It's the same.
And
It's the same in the Kruger Park as well.
But now, this is really a point at which Patricia Glynn and my friend Cormac there's a marriage of minds there, because I mean Cormac's whole orientation is based on this idea that we are not a collection of objects, we are a communion of subjects. Yeah. And from a legal point of view, saying we need to shift the paradigm from this presumptuous sort of anthropocentrism that says the human being is like the centre of the universe and only humans have rights, only humans are subjects, everything else are objects and therefore property.
So
now
you come up against very, very stiff opposition, because that goes right to the core of many religious beliefs all over the world.
it does, but now even within the conservation circles, let's leave the poor, misguided, yet sincere, devout Christians like me aside. Let's talk about the conservationists who also view nature as property and animals as property.
Yeah.
And isn't this really what the whole logic of hunting is? Well, we shoot animals for trophy hunting because they don't have rights. They are simply property. And Patricia's point is that this is absurd, because we are actually criticizing these other buggers who exploit, and the mining companies and all these other people who exploit the earth. But yet, the whole conservation industry, by thinking that there has to be an economic value and that animals have to pay their rent, and therefore allowing the concept of hunting, that for me, that in a sense is just as ethically dubious.
Yeah. But John, basically, what I think it boils down to, the actual essence of it is that it's a very primordial, very, very boiling down and thinking, but if you don't believe that animals can go to heaven, then that gives you the right to be the master over them. Then they're only there for your use. And that's fundamentally what Christianity is all about.
Except I would put it slightly differently. I'd say I haven't experienced heaven, so I can't say one way or the other. But what I am coming to be quite sort of vivid about is I do know what hell is like.
Yeah.
So what do? We condemn animals, and it's not just animals, we condemn humans to a hell on earth.
Yeah.
In terms of what we're doing in resource exploitation.
When fundamental Christianity, and probably a lot but not all religions, believe that the human animal is the most superior and has got all sorts of rights over everything else. And that's the basis of our relationship with nature, which I believe is wrong. But it's based, I think, in many cases on the assumption that people can go to heaven and animals can't.
Well, that's only it is. And that is common, and I acknowledge it. But that's not biblical. It's not. It's based out of fear. It often arises out of an anxiety that people have about the fact that life needs to have meaning, and if you're living a miserable existence on earth, will it comfort you to think, well, there's another place you can go to, and we call it heaven, and It's
There's
a
light.
purely spiritual place.
Yeah, but there's light at the end of the tunnel.
But it's not, I mean, just to say in terms of Christian theology, the whole Christian faith is based on two fundamentals. One is the incarnation, the Word became flesh. God so loved the earth, the world. It wasn't just a metaphorical thing, it's a concrete thing. He loves this planet, or he or she, however you wish to. And so that's the one thing. The other thing is, then of course we could talk of the resurrection as the other one, and that is about the triumph of life over all. And it's not been too sort of distorted perspective on it. It's just about saying that there's a regenerative capacity and a transformational capacity that human beings enjoy to think differently, fundamentally differently. And the only superior ability we have, according to my friend Max Neef, well, his father said to him, well, what is a distinguishing thing that makes human beings different from other creatures? And his father said, try stupidity.
I've seen some dumb animals.
So Max Neef says how his first course as a young economist was a course at the University of Berkeley where he had an inquiry into the origins and nature of human stupidity. And he says students came and they packed out his classes, thought this was a really hilarious thing. First lecture was very funny, they laughed like crazy. He says by the third lecture, the whole atmosphere in the class was totally different because they realized that this is a very, very serious business about how stupid human beings have been. Now, the question is, okay, we can't just sit and condemn people because they're stupid. The fact is that it's human beings that are recognizing that stupidity. So there is a potential redemptive prospect that human beings can become unstupid. Now, what is required for humans to, as it were, outgrow their stupidity? And that's why, for me, it's about, that lovely saying of old Darwin's biographer, one of his commentators. He said, it is not our fatuous ideas that change the world, but a patient and sudden and deep understanding of how nature works. I don't remember his name, but yeah.
Funny, there's a question that is often asked to me on safari, but not once or twice, hundreds of times. Like you're sitting there watching a herd of impala. They say, "Oh, impala clever." Now, it's only a human that can ask that question, because they expect us to benchmark the impala against some human form of measurement. But clever is a very difficult thing to measure. I mean, even our intelligent quota system is flawed because it depends on who you are and what you do as to whether you're clever or not. You get some people who've got an IQ beyond genius level, but you put them out in the bush situation and they'll die. I mean, they'll shrivel up and die within a short space of time. So the measure of an animal or person's success is probably a much greater measure of, well, how clever they are, I suppose. Like an impala, for example. Impala is probably the most successful antelope in Africa. And that's purely measured by the amount of numbers there are of impala. Now, success in an evolutionary perspective is measured by, in fact, in your perspective and my perspective as well, the amount of your successful genetic material in the next generation. That's the measure of a success of a species, of an individual within a species. So using that benchmark, impala are extremely successful and therefore clever, given their circumstances and their environment. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I love these trees.
That's nice to look down there.
I remember when I was recently married, we had one of these growing outside our front, and then one day all the caterpillars hatched and you've never seen a tree stripped stripped down to nothing by all these caterpillars feeding off it. And then, of course, the monarch butterfly, I think it was. And then you just see this extraordinary abundance. First you have leaves, and then of course the caterpillars hatch, and then shoo, they're all gone. And then you see these caterpillars, pupate, and next thing they're all flying off, and there's another abundance, and this tree stripped bare until the next season, and shoo, it's all in bloom again. Yeah. Now that's when you talk about the resurrection. For me, that is a kind of a very concrete illustration of what the whole perspective is. That there is this regenerative capacity, and how nature has its own way of establishing balances and how extravagantly generous it is at one level, and how it regenerates itself, and how the human stupidity for me is that we try and think we can control it and harness it, and that for me is the myth of the conservationist is we can conserve the planet. All we can do is just get with it.
Yeah, the frightening thing is the more we interfere, often the worse it gets. Well, not always, but in many instances.
In the perverse way, yeah.
Yeah, you try and exact some control for want of generating a better outcome, and things go so pear-shaped because of your intervention that everything gets a whole lot worse. John, I thought we'll follow this road down. It goes down, crosses through there, but then we'll hook into this valley and go.
Lovely. Yeah.
Go out that way. This is all quite sort of virgin territory for me. Should we get off the road and walk?
Yeah, let's do that.
When they're walking, they look down because they're worried about where their feet are going to land.
Yeah.
But in doing so, they miss everything that's happening around them. I mean, there were two guys in this group that were going off tracking ahead of the main body of the group. They were tracking a giraffe, which is a really easy thing to track. And they're tracking it track by track, watching each track along the ground. And we were sitting back giggling because they actually walked to within 5 meters of the giraffe without seeing it.
And so they looked up and there was above them.
There was a giraffe right above them.
And they were holding onto a branch. Oh, this is a leg.
But I mean, that is a bit of a metaphor for life as well, that scan what's happening around where your daily kind of immediate interaction is happening, but keep looking around, because otherwise you're going to miss out on all the other stuff that's happening around you.
Well, for me that's why I've loved horse riding, because first thing I was taught by my riding instructor was don't look at the ground because that's when you end up. And don't steer the horse. You must just look where you're going, where you want to go. And if you're in touch with the animal in a organic way, in a sort of intuitive way, the animal will rely on you and trust you to actually, and will follow your eyes. And that's a beautiful metaphor for nature for me. Is okay. The other thing I was taught in my wilderness trails is that you shut up and you listen. So it's partly from looking, it's also from talking. So maybe I must allow nature to talk back.
Was that quite difficult, huh?
No, it doesn't take drugs like me, like my Ritalin, which sort of makes me...
Did I send you that link to TED?
Yes, you did. Well, that was my friend Nick Marks that I told you about.
Nick Marks, okay. Have you watched Simon Sinek?
No,
Cool.
Have you done one?
No, not me. not a cynic, not a CY. His surname is SINEK. Or whatever, that's his stage name, I suppose. But he has this fascinating talk about what makes people, leaders, businesses successful. What makes great leaders? And he researched them. he researched them and found a commonality in all of them, and the way that they behave, that they communicate and lead is completely, it's all the same, but it's completely different to the way most other people do it. It's from the inside out.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially what they do is they have determined why they're doing what they're doing, rather than what they're doing or how they're doing it.
Mm.
You know, and a lot of people know what they're doing.
So
Some people know how they're doing it.
and how to do it right.
Yeah, but not
Yeah.
many people know why they're doing it.
Yes.
And the great leaders and organizations have a very firm idea on why they're doing what they're doing,
Yeah.
and the how and the what is just a consequence of that.
Yes.
It's not the most important thing for them.
So it's about conviction. They know they've got a sense of inner conviction. This is what they need to.
Yeah.
Why they're doing it, they
Because
resolved it as sort of a.
The people who follow them, the people who buy their products, the people that they're interacting with and are leading, they believe what they believe. So you must set up your belief, the why of what you behave, of how, sorry, the why of what you're doing is the most important thing. And then you will end up being surrounded by people who believe what you believe.
Naturally, they just gravitate to you.
They gravitate towards you because they believe what you believe.
Yeah.
And that's why Martin Luther King was so successful. You know, it's a fascinating talk. I'll
Well,
send you the
well,
link.
in fact,
Because it goes right down to the core of how everyone behaves. Because if you take a cross section of the brain, you've got the in the center part of the brain is where all the most basic emotions come from. I've forgotten the name of it now.
yeah, it's the
Surrounded by the cerebral cortex.
hippocampus or the amygdala. Is it the
No, it's the
brainstem? The
primordial brainstem. But basically, everything that we do, whether you need to eat or breathe or have sex or anything like that, it comes from the most primordial inner part of the brain, and it goes outwards. Controls the way we behave. And now, kids who've got ADDH, whatever you call it, attention hyperactive, okay?
Yeah.
The effect of the Ritalin on their brains is it allows the outside part of the brain, the cerebral cortex, to control the center part of the brain. It overrides it. The messages go the wrong way, and that's how they're able to calm them down,
yeah,
which is quite radical when you think about it.
yeah,
It goes against the grain of how we all. So, and that's why people who are able to communicate from the inside out are much more successful, because they're communicating to other people's insides of their brain, their brainstem.
But it's interesting you say that, because they, you know, in the studies, because I myself and my son have supposedly this affliction. I call it added value, ADD, because there is a variation of it where it's in fact the opposite, and it's people who hyper focus and get so locked in and so deeply identified at the emotional level that they lose touch with the social reality.
Yeah.
But that's not to say they're losing touch with reality. It's often people like that who have this incredible instinct for nature, and Thomas Berry calls it, he said, the human species as a whole suffers from nature deficit disorder.
Yep.
NDD, nature deficit disorder, because we are so preoccupied with our human, self-absorbed in our humanness, that we lose that deeper sense of purpose. And that, you know, the studies have shown that that some of the extraordinary people of history, most of the extraordinary people of history, would probably be classified as ADD.
Yeah.
One of whom, in fact, probably walked this very path.
Yeah.
Winston Churchill. I mean, he is a young...
In fact, not only him.
Well, I mentioned him. Of course, they were both. But
Gandhi is a man who would be considered as a prophet, you know. And there's a man with vision and focus, and he understands the why of what he's doing, and he got people to follow him. I mean, he had a following of millions, didn't he? But it wasn't what he did or how he did it, it was why he did it that got people excited about him.
Was he also considered to have had attention deficit disorder? But I mean, I mention it because, you know, Richard Branson.
Yeah. Tony Factor, I mean, there's another.
Tony Factor, well, yeah, that was actually more sort of had a form of autism there, but
he was dyslexic.
Dyslexia, yeah, that's right. But that's
the term given to it. So I'm just wondering if you could walk along the top right.
The little zebra fall.
We've chosen a nice warm part of the day. 10 to 10. All the animals should be coming down to the water, and you can see from the way the wind's blowing with the dust moving, all of our scent is going through the animals.
Yeah.
Which, when you're walking in rhino thick country, it's probably the safest way to do it.
Yeah, they keep. But some that's fascinating. Though. Just wanted to quickly make this connection, and I'm trying to be quiet for a bit. But you know, Wayne Duvenag, you know Wayne, you've met him.
Yeah. That's
what came through very, very powerfully when I interviewed him yesterday. Is his sense that he knew. You know, he said he always wanted to be an architect, and he said he thought he would make a good architect, but and since he was, I think, there's still been an architect, but not in the narrow sense of designing buildings. He is seeing the issue of the larger picture and the need for a design
that
brings people into coherence with the environment that they're in.
You think of where he is and what he's doing and what he's capable of, he's got far greater potential than being a run-of-the-mill architect.
Absolutely. I mean, you remember he outlined that when he spoke at the Wilderness Leadership conference, the whole flow diagram of how they recycle the water. And I said, well, there's the architect in you coming out. Yeah. What's significant is that he wants to mentor and be there available to help inspire and encourage the next generation. And I joked with him, I said, well, so Simon, are you going to then offer I said, Wayne, I said, it strikes me that you sound like the perfect affirmative action candidate for your next job. I said, notwithstanding the outward appearance, because you act affirmatively, you actually have a sense of purpose. That's what you described as that innate, deep sense of conviction about why this is important. And then you just go out and work out the how. Well, these other clever people can do that.
Well, John, the talk that I do now, in which I relate the whole Battle of Steenkop, I relate it to business structure. But at the end of it, I start talking about who is it that changes our world. And the conclusion I've come to, and that I carry across, is it's the warriors, the prophets, the poets, and the dreamers are the ones that change our world.
And I assume warriors, not W-O-R-R-Y.
No, the fighting.
The warriors,
the Shaka type, Napoleonic type person we're talking about.
Do you make that point? It's not the warriors, it's the warriors.
Yeah, with an A. Yeah.
Because the warriors, if we get so worried, we're not going to change anything.
So you'll never get anything done.
Yeah,
good. Big herd of giraffe that passes over. Look at that.
Yeah.
But that's the point that I make in the whole thing. Is that the people that dream, the people who are poets, who are artistic, the people who listen to their right brains, they're the ones who have creative thought processes that are strong enough and amazing enough, allow them to change the world that we live in. People who are warriors, prophets, poets and dreamers are all right brain strong.
And architects, by the way.
Architects are there too, yeah,
You
absolutely.
know, they found that the highest proportion of left-handed people of any profession is in fact, the profession which is the highest proportion of left-handed people is architects.
Yeah, yeah. But when I'm talking about warriors, prophets, poets and dreamers, there's a generic.
I know what you mean, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? It's people who are artistic, people who have been creative.
Who think in a sort of three-dimensional way, which is why architects, you know, they can picture things in reality rather than in a two-dimensional way.
People who can think also, not just from a design perspective, but people who think out of the box completely from a creative perspective. The lateral thinkers. They're right brain strong, and that's what we need to encourage in everyone that we interact with. People who work for us should be allowed to be creative in the workplace. Our education systems should encourage more creativity.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing about the architect, the reason I pick up on that and linking it back to Wayne, is that I was at a conference once where I was observer rather than participant. And the whole structure of the process had been designed so that you didn't have a facilitator controlling the group discussion. You had...
Rhino Midden.
Yeah. You had, and I noticed that the group discussion was problematic. And I happened to notice, which wasn't obvious to the people in the group, that the one guy who every time he opened his mouth, they just didn't know how to deal with him, that he was the only left-handed person in the group. So I just pointed that out to them, explained the whole thing of right brain, left brain, sort of hemispheric sort of integration. And I said, there's maybe just, you find it hard to understand it because he is thinking differently, but there's a resource in him that could make your whole group discussion enrich if you try and stretch a bit. It had such an electrifying effect. And gave him a sense of confidence because he was beginning to withdraw more and more because they just don't get it. And it's very sad because that's why you talk about kids with ADD. Well, it's because their self-esteem is what the problem becomes because they don't know how to relate.
That could be a saying for left-handed people all around the world, is that everyone else just doesn't get it. What's wrong with it, you know? I mean, often I'm like that. I feel like that.
Oh, you're left-handed?
Yeah, I'm left-handed. And so I have all these brilliant ideas. And so often people just don't get it. What's wrong with them?
Now, this is going to get personal, a little bit more kind of private, shall we say.
Oy.
Because you know how they worked out. You know that the left-handed and right-handedness is a consequence of not your genetic endowment, but the uterine environment. That you as a baby, when you were gestating in the womb of your mother, she happened to secrete a larger number of male hormone, and that affected your development of your brain so as to just give favour the right hemisphere development. Now, when you go home, you can do an experiment on this. And the reason they found this and were able to deduce that is that they noticed, and it's only been possible for a study of men who are left-handed, is that left-handed men, that their left testicle is heavier than their right one, whereas right-handed men, their right testicle is heavier than their left one. So just by looking and observing the hang of your balls, they could work out this person's left-handed or right-handed, and that was obviously, they knew that it was the left and the right testicle or what obviously produced different hormones, and that's what they were able to correlate. It's an extraordinary story when you think about it.
Well,
and then they
depends
started
on whether it's actually correct or not.
Well, I mean, generally. So now I know what you're going to do when you get home. Okay, and I'll have the camera to go.
So just wipe him out like a John because there's shit on the side of your face.
I'm not exaggerating. I promise you that. I heard this in a documentary. Where
You read it in a Scope magazine?
No,
Or was it FHM?
Well, I mean, I mean, we can joke about it because we get so
I'll get a shot of that. That's beautiful.
self-conscious about it, but it's
So the lights, it's all a bit bright and kind of washed out. But it does look like the most beautiful, sort of diluted watercolour in this light. This has got to be the most game-rich valley I've seen, John.
Really?
So productive. I mean, everywhere we've been walking, we've seen animals.
yeah. They're obviously very interested in this conversation we're having. I probably also
You
think
pick
it's
up all the
rubbish.
rhino in the bottom there. The giraffe, sorry, in the bottom. There'll be rhino
Oh, yes,
further
there we
up.
go, yeah.
We'll see rhino, I'm sure. Oh, there's 3 down there at the bottom.
And that's beautiful behind them.
No, there's
Yeah, it's beautiful, it's beautiful.
In fact, the view we've got of Spierenkop here, no, is exactly the route that the British took up, straight up that first hill, and then it's connected with the saddle to the main Spierenkop.
Oh, yes, yeah. And that was which general had us campaign town?
Well, General Sir Charles Warren was the guy that led, he was in charge, but it was Major General Edward Woodgate who led the men up there in the first place.
No, I didn't think they weren't thinking too much about rhinos then.
Oh, well, you know, this farm is called Renosterfontein.
Yeah.
That's the name that was given to this farm in 1850. But I can tell you around about 1900 when the war was going on, there was nothing here.
Part of me feels really sad when I come here because I think of a thing which D. Hock says. So D. Hock is the guy who founded Visa, you know, the card guys. An extraordinary story. I must give you a copy of his lecture, but he starts off, he says, just look outside, and he's fortunately there were windows in the auditorium in the place he was giving a talk. And just for a moment, look at the trees and the nature outside. And just do an imaginary sort of exercise. When I snap my fingers, imagine that human beings vanished from the planet. Completely. Gone. And then imagine, how do you imagine the trees and the flowers, if they could, how would they feel if human beings vanished?
Yeah.
I mean, if you do that exercise, what comes to mind?
I wouldn't care.
Heave a bloody sigh of relief. Phew, they've gone. Now we can get on with living. Because he then says the crisis that faced the banking system at the time would never have been solved if they'd used the conventional wisdom of management, bureaucracy. He says they had to, fortunately he had the respect and trust of senior people, and they were in such a deep crisis with credit card proliferation there, that they were able to find a completely different approach to dealing with the problem of credit at the time. Yeah. And that was a development of Visa. He says they only got it 30% right, and sadly only 30%, because subsequently the banking crisis they went back to the old way of doing things. And that's why we had the whole collapse in 2008. And he was a deep ecologist as well, who really deeply understood the way nature works.
So I think it was Einstein who said you can't use conventional thinking to solve an unconventional problem.
See, but nowadays even people say the very term problem implies solution. And in systemic thinking is saying, well, there isn't a solution, there's only learning. Well, learning for what? Learning just how to do things right in an operational way of efficiency, or doing the right thing, which is learning at the level of innovation, experimentation, and ethical accountability, which is what I think Wayne Duvenage is. He's a guy who's learning, and he says you can make mistakes, guys, as long as you don't pretend that you've got a solution, and if you mess up and stuff up, you embrace your errors.
Yeah.
And
I was always told you should never chastise someone for doing the wrong thing for the right reason.
Exactly, yes. And I mean, and that's really the whole point about the evolutionary motor of evolution, if I dare to use a mechanistic term, is nature's experimentation, and it's endless. Kind of endless adaptation process. How species evolve in the context of the environment. It's different genetic throwbacks and mutations that actually produce the forward, the forward survival potential, as Taylor de Chardin called it. It was a pre-adaptation for human survival. He says, well, the human species, their pre-adaptation for survival isn't our ability to run fast or long toenails or heavy balls or whatever it may be. It's about our spiritual sensitivity at that deep intuitive level that you were describing. And it's not going to be, and often religion is the enemy of it, because religion tries to codify and control and contain and dogmatize it. And it's not in religion in the narrow sense. So for me, I just love that, and I find paradoxically some of my most spiritual people that I know are atheists. In the sense that they don't have need of this, or that their religious or spiritual need is not one of fear about a judging God, and it's more about an embracing of life and the extraordinary richness of it and the majesty of it. Now,
I would definitely fall into that.
It is. But then also, he then are honest enough to acknowledge that, hey, what is our purpose as a human species on this planet? As every other species has its.
But John, just by asking that question, it illustrates arrogance of the humans, of the human animal. The fact that we assume that we've got a purpose
or a place.
That very assumption. I mean, what's the function of a rhino? What is their role to play? Or an ant, or maybe they don't have a function. Maybe we don't have a function. There isn't a cause. There isn't a goal. We just simply are.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
therefore I am. The human species is just.
That Cartesian thing about consciousness and about our consciousness is what gives us a superiority. Our consciousness also gives us our humility. And for me, I can only really answer that question in a sense with reference to my own theistic sense. But if you say, what do I see in that beautiful rhino, or that beautiful giraffe, or that beautiful animal? I see something of the manifestation of a created God who loves.
But it's an anthropomorphic perspective.
Well, I mean, it's not anthropomorphic, it's John Clarke's perspective, because I'm not. It's just in a sense that I'm saying I can only do it from my own subjectivity.
No, I know that, but it's a human animal describing everything in relation to the way the human animal sees it.
Yes, and we see it within our limitations.
If we weren't here, no other animal would see it in that way.
Well, you're going to enjoy it when Patricia comes. She and I have this very same debate, because she's very, challenging to my own sort of assumptions, and I accept that. And I'm not trying to defend a kind of a thing, but all I'm saying that for me there is a sense of awe about, and that just at least to challenge my own Christian brethren, that this kind of utilitarian attitude to nature as being there for our.
Look at the Bushman.
Absolutely.
The Bushman had incredible reverence for all things natural, but particularly for an eland. They saw an eland as being, I don't know, maybe something close to being a godlike animal. It's only the modern civilized, perhaps humans, that have taken God to be in man's form, because we believe ourselves to be so wonderful and beautiful. But why can't God be an eland?
Absolutely, yes.
You know, if you know, or an ant. That starts off.
You see, D. Hock would say, it looks like these are a chaotic sort of mess of branches going in all directions. But as I zoom out, you see a pattern emerging within the chaos.
And each one has its own purpose.
He lost his job and found himself, joining the ranks of the unemployed.
But that illustrates to me the extremely high importance of pilgrimage. We need to go on his personal journey to get perspective on a wider scale. And you need to be out of your comfort zone. You need to go to a different land, see different people, and look at different things in order to get a new and very often better perspective. You need to go on pilgrimages in your life.
Yeah.
Your life should be a series of, and that's why working for the same company for too long, without taking time off sabbaticals and stuff like it's dangerous. Rotschnabel Madenhake. Or if you're English, a red-billed oxpecker. And they were reintroduced here a couple of years ago. And they've flourished, they've taken off.
Really?
Brilliant. Let's actually stick it here.
But doesn't, I mean, you were four children now, Simon. How did having children affect your reality? Because you're a younger father than me.
Having kids, John, it's the most exhausting, humbling, enlightening, beautiful experience that you can have in your life. All wrapped in one. There's no one that shouldn't have that experience somehow, some way, because it's just, we ask what's the function of the human, and the arrogance associated with that question, but I think the function of the individual is to procreate, measure the success of the species by the number of individuals. I think that's what we're all genetically programmed for, and that's why it feels so good, feels so wonderful, as you know, to have your own offspring. It's a special thing.
And I notice that those grey hairs on your beard are possibly testimony to the fact that it is humbling.
Yes, and I can see you've been humbled a lot as well.
Yeah. Well, Mark Twain's favourite thing, he said, when I was 14, my father was so ignorant, I couldn't stand to have him around. But now that I'm 21, I can't believe how much my father's learnt in 7 years. And with respect to my own son, I always was saving up this joke when he turned 21. But when I came to actually telling it, I was caught by surprise. And I've told him this because the fact of the matter is it was entirely true. I thought I knew it when he was 14.
Yeah.
The month he's kept me humble in all sorts of disarming, embarrassing, and sheer terrifying ways. But he has taught me, without intending to teach, and this is this whole thing, I see your point about just being present and being real to who you are. He's trying to be real to who he is.
Yeah. I think that's also the most important thing that a parent can do for a child. It's not educate them, it's not give them a good, healthy, happy upbringing. It's none of that complicated stuff. The most important thing a parent can do for the child, just to be there. It's as simple as that.
When they really have found that they're in a lonely spot.
Don't focus on accumulating wealth and fancy education for your children and all that stuff. The best thing you can do for your child.
Absolutely.
Just be there.
And I mean, in moments of real sort of vulnerability that you don't anticipate, like when his dog died, when his dog got sick and he had to, the humane thing, the dog is having seizures and it was obviously had a tumour and it was just degenerating and was suffering. So it came to a point where I took it to the vet, and the vet said, look, no, I can do more tests, I can spend a fortune, but look guys, why we want to do it. So I go back to Sam, said the vet says, it would be merciful to use our human capacity, such as we have it technologically, medically, to euthanize a dog. He's okay, Dad. Just got to do something. And he disappears with his mate and comes back having shaved his head completely bald, and puts her head in the thing and gives it. Now that thing was just, I was rattled, like, what the hell is this? I did a bit of a search on the internet, saw, you must see his hair now, it's grown again.
Yeah.
He's a hell of a good looking guy. He is a mature man now. It's almost like that death experience of his dog was a rite of passage for him, and a rite of passage for me. And I'm just hoping my beard will now start turning black again. I'm also inclined to shave it off. As I read the book and the account, I'm just pause and tell me, they did camp at Three Tree Lodge. Wasn't that a sort of a staging post? A bit further up, hey?
Listen, you've got to remember, there were 12,500 men encamped here.
Yeah.
So they were encamped all over the place. I found sites all over the place here where they were encamped. You can see where they've moved rocks to put their tents down. Actually, at the spot where the lodge is built, no. But close to it, there are places all around there where all these men were encamped, the men who were going to be involved in the Battle of Speenkop later.
But Churchill was sort of shuttling back and forth.
Yes.
And I imagine it had been sort of into this hollow and up there. So is it feasible to
Churchill was
suggest...
sitting up on Three Tree Hill, which is just off to the north of where we are here now, trying to get some information out of Warren about what was happening on Speenkop, and he couldn't get any information or enough information in his view, so he jumped on his horse and he rode to the base of Speenkop and then walked up Speenkop to go and get a first-hand account of what was happening up there. And that's how Churchill actually got involved. That's how Churchill ended up reporting back to Warren and ending up with this message penciled by General Warren himself to be taken to Thornycroft, commanding officer on top of Speenkop, ordering him to hold the hill at all costs. And sadly, Churchill only managed to get back up there because this back and forth took a long time. He only ended up meeting up with Thornycroft at the base of Speenkop at 10 o'clock, or no, probably around about midnight that evening.
Mm-hmm.
And by then it was too late. The British had already retired. But that's Churchill was intimately involved in what happened here.
Well, yeah, and I mean, people talk of him as being the embedded journalist. We talked about the war in Iraq, where the embedded journalist was sent. I mean, that was the first media war, really.
It was. Churchill was actually more than embedded. He managed to contrive a situation where he was both a soldier and a journalist at the same time. All the other journalists here were not allowed that privilege. So they were embedded in a sense that they were involved and they were actually up at the front, but not directly involved and knowledgeable of what was actually happening, whereas Churchill was.
But now, how did he contrive to do that? Was that just because he had that deep sense of purpose and genius? Because he milked it a hell of a lot when it came to...
Bumptious, pugnacious, opportunistic fellow. Incredibly so. But what had happened before this is he had become a prisoner of war. He was purely a journalist at that time. Then he managed to escape from Pretoria and made his way back to the front. At the time where he did that, it was the only bit of good news that the entire British Empire had about this little escapade in South Africa. And so his name was all over the press. And in fact, just prior to that, prior to Churchill coming back up to the front after his escape, Buller had just had his ass whipped badly at Colenso. So Buller invited young Churchill, he's 25 years old, into his tent to offer him some congratulations about this wonderful feat, his escape and so on. And Churchill, when asked by Buller, is there anything I can do for you, young man? Churchill asked him for a commission in one of the colonial fighting units. So he became a journalist who also then had a commission. He was a lieutenant in a South African light horse. So that's how he managed to organize that situation. In fact, bypassing the very regulation that was put in place because of his own behavior in the first place. Because in the Battle of Omdurman in Sudan, Churchill wrote a book about that, and he also wrote a book, that one was called The River War, and then he wrote a book about the frontier wars in India. And in both of those wars, Churchill as a soldier writing these books, was very critical of his senior officers. And as a result of those two books being published and being popular back home, it was now expressly forbidden for a journalist to be a soldier, serving soldier at the same time. You know, you could be one or the other, but not both. So Churchill managed to bypass those regulations that that were there because of him in the first place.
Well, it's sort of poetic, irony to that, because when he became, the commander-in-chief in the Second World War, there's a documentary on in the BBC at the moment about Churchill and his generals. He fought like with every single one of his generals. He had a very tense relationship with them, and very few of them understood him. Even Monty got his respect, and things started turning differently. And it's extraordinary.
I think what was extraordinary and why that worked is too many like-minded people together in a situation is often very destructive. You've got to have opposite thinkers working together for a common cause. And that's what Churchill's situation in the Second World War was. The vision was absolutely perfectly crystal clear. It was how they achieved that vision, so that even they were working against each other and sometimes not speaking to each other as a result of the arguments and discussions that they had, they were all, in the end, focused on a common vision and a common goal, and that's the most important thing.
So you hear that, and so that's why you and I are such good friends, Simon. To have an atheist and a believer together, it's a recipe for greatness,
Absolutely.
And it's atheists like you that restore my faith in God.
I've got no comeback to that one.
No.
The problem with Christians is they keep forgiving each other. So that means you can do anything you want, you're going to be forgiven.
Well,
So there's a lack of accountability
Yeah.
in the faith.
Yeah.
Take away that forgiveness.
Well, Bonhoeffer would have called it cheap grace. He is a guy that basically lost his life, is part of the whole conspiracy to try and assassinate Hitler, and shortly before the liberation he was executed, and his whole point was that you talk about costly grace and cheap grace, and he said the German church in the context of Hitler were just so appeasing, so full of appeasement, and his whole point is that if you look at the core doctrines of Christianity, Jesus gave his life for human beings. He was one of us.
Yeah.
And it cost him his life.
Yeah.
Yet we think we can basically take that for granted. And he says, no, you've got to also live your life with that same sacrificial commitment and altruistic yearning for a better way.
Well, that's the difference between the human animal and all the others. Very few of the others exhibit true altruistic behavior. In fact, none of them. Only one that comes close is a hyena.
Really? Altruistic?
Yeah.
Most people think of hyenas as the very opposite. As
Not at all.
the embodiment of evils and manipulative opportunism. Have I got it wrong?
No, that's a Christian perspective.
Have I got it wrong?
Absolutely. I know a lot of businessmen are far worse than that.
No. Okay.
Alright. Exhibits a non-genetically aligned altruism. In other words, I would sacrifice myself for you. Even a lioness, for example. She'll defend herself and her cubs almost to the death, but not quite. For her cub's sake. But she'll get to a point where she realizes, and this is purely a genetic, an evolutionary explanation, is that if she dies, her cubs most certainly are going to die. She can always reproduce again, but if she dies, then her whole lineage stops.
Yeah.
Humans don't do that. They're the only other animal that does.
Yeah. That I've seen, documentaries have shown like this supposed sort of, it's always put very anthropocentrically about the war between hyenas and lions, yet in certain circumstances they've actually cooperated. where they realised, like getting a kill out of a swamp where there's kind of too many. There's an extraordinary documentary which showed how, in fact, they were completely going against even what you would have thought.
You quite often see one or two lionesses feeding on a large carcass, like a hippo or buffalo or a giraffe or something like that. So hyenas feeding on one end and the lions feeding on the other end.
Yeah, no.
There's more than enough for them.
Yeah, so they realise
there's more than enough.
Yeah.
No point.
So you go first and sort of electrocute yourself and lie on it, and I'll walk over you like Sir Walter Raleigh did with the Queen. So Churchill was able to somehow, square this circle by being both a journalist and a soldier. Was able to then report on the war and influence its outcome, because the dilemma I've had in my own writing as a journalist and as an author of the whole Pondo story is that, and as a social worker, is that it's a conflict, it's a roles in tension with each other, because I need to report it and tell the story honestly for another audience more wider than the Amapondo. But in the process I become so identified with their personal, sort of their national kind of struggle as a people that and that's why I'm able to write about it, because I can write with it in a way that they subjectively within it are not, can't say it because of the consequences it would have for them. Whereas they're not going to get hold of me. I mean, who the hell am I? But, and so I'm thinking maybe I can ask the Queen to make me an honorary Pondo, commission me to become a Pondo man.
That's a good idea. You look at any conflict, you've got on the one hand, journalists are supposed to be not involved and not take sides. But being involved takes many different forms. You may not actually pick up arms, you may be offering moral support in the cause, but you can't name one journalist who in any conflict has not picked sides. It's impossible not to see yourself aligned with one group or another.
Well, to tell the truth, you see, the thing is, I'm really committed to telling the truth. And people say, oh, what's the truth? It's a matter of perspective.
Yes, of course.
So I try and get all perspectives.
Yeah, but the truth is, John, is that you favour wilderness. And that's your truth.
Well, the truth is that I'm produced by this extraordinary planet, and I'm a little bit self-concerned that my species are actually,
so you've actually got
endangered as a whole.
Yeah, and the problem, when I say it's a problem, I don't think it is a problem, but when you as a journalist have a cause, you're no longer completely objective in the way you represent that.
Well, nor would I really want to be. But you see, I don't like this antagonism between objective, subjective. It's about saying, I want us to get the perspective of the truth. Like they say, okay, my brother quotes, he says, oh, we all say perception is reality. Yes, maybe, but deception is tragedy.
Yeah.
And so the question I'm having is, I respect the perspective that people have from their own context, the Australian mining CEO and the Queen and even the poacher, even the shit of a man who's actually on charges now for rhino poaching. I'd like to get inside his head, get his perspective and how he could do it. But deception is tragedy. I want to get everybody's perspective out there, put it out there and say to people, okay, make up your mind yourself. I'm not going to preach.
Well, there are good guys and bad guys in this world, in the cartoonistic Disney World way.
Yeah.
Everyone sees themselves as a good guy. Everyone justifies what they do for some
absolutely
reason or another.
Well, that's what the whole War and Peace is summed up as being. Human beings are not rational creatures. We are rationalizing creatures. We do things and we rationalize. But the very fact that, as we said earlier, that Tolstoy could say that, he was reasoning that one through at another level, and wrote bloody a tome that is so thick that you wonder why I couldn't have summed it up in a simple one-page news release. He couldn't, because he had to tell a story.
Yeah, the altitude is bad today, John.
Sorry?
The altitude is bad today.
Yeah. But Simon, yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, John. I'm just glad I was able to share it.
Now we're going to have a skinny dip.
Yeah.
And we can verify the truth or otherwise
Now,
about left-handed
simple.
people.
Rather than you do it.